Hello, everyone. It's Sister Folk, and welcome to your first instructor critique for our magazine spreads. I'll be going through our projects here on Facebook in the order that you posted them. So we're going to start with Penny, and then we'll move down through those students that opted in. Caitlin, I think you opted in. Carly. So we'll just move down in this order. I will most likely divide this video into two portions so it doesn't get too long, and so you'll be able to more easily find your video. And I'm just going to, right off the bat, refer you to one thing that I think is really helpful for students right before you turn in your assignment, maybe the Thursday or Friday before it's due. Use this minimum expectations as a checklist. Work your way through it and ask yourself if you have each of these. Do you have 2-column layout? Do you have at least 600 words? Did you remember to divide your article into subheadings and headings? Did you use a pull quote? And did you take 2 images yourself that are included, a word wrap, etc.? So make sure you do that. That's one of the things I do when I grade. And so it'll definitely help you out if you can be sure you've done that in advance. All right. The other thing is, please remember to use those rules of typography. Those are extremely important on this assignment. Probably one of the most important factors of this assignment is contrasting typography. Okay, so make sure your typography is really solid, as is the importance of white space. Sometimes we have a tendency to have articles that have no white space in them. So try to remember to inject your articles with lots of white space for this assignment. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started with you, Penny. I have glanced over most of these, but I haven't really looked at them in depth, so it may take a minute to look at each of them, especially if they're kind of uploaded like 2 portions, and that'll help me kind of mentally put them together and see how they work as a 3-page spread. Okay, good, Penny. Here's one thing I noticed right off the bat is you always want to turn hyphens off. Okay, so you have a hyphen here. Make sure you turn that off. And then I would like to see, instead of having this kind of not symmetrical spacing, see how over here is a little bit wider, over here, then over here, this is more narrow than this. I would instead probably encourage you to make this image flow off the page, at least on the sides. You can keep this nice slight blue transparency down here if you want, or you could pull the transparency down and maybe just have the transparency be on the bottom portion. You could put the title up here in this that naturally is occurring on your image, and you could pulling this image off the page is going to avoid having so many lines that are detracting from the image in the background and from the title, which is what your eye should go to first, the title and the image. Okay, so I think making it a full bleed is going to help it look a little bit more modern. The other thing is, I would probably encourage you to make this type size a little bit smaller. That'll help it look a little bit more modern. Okay, so that is some suggestions for your first page here. Let's take a look at page 3. One thing I think might be kind of nice is you could perhaps use this line and have it go all the way across the page, using that full bleed idea again. One of the things you want to do in design is you want to eliminate as many of these places where your eye gets kind of stuck as possible. So see how this draws attention to this area, whereas if it just was a full bleed and pulled itself all the way across the page, it would help your eye flow. So I would probably recommend doing that with these that you have here. And then I'd make sure these subheadings are aligned with your columns. See how this one is flush, but this one and this. Okay, and then make sure you have your hyphens turned off for your body copy as well. This is a recurring image from that title. I would probably take this off and instead make this image larger or make this image larger and inject a little bit more white space. Okay, so you could pull this column so it's a little bit narrower, make this image a little bit more eye-catching and larger, or this one more eye-catching and larger, and use this white space down here. Instead of just feeling like it's empty and you put an image there, instead have your column go all the way to the end, but do something really in your images. Another issue I'm seeing here is this column is so narrow, it's really creating some issues with your words. See how this is a word you have to have hyphenated because the column is so small? What you could do instead is you could pull this quote and have it be centered in the middle of these two columns. Having the pull quote be in the middle of two columns will allow those columns to have complete words in them. And usually you don't want to have only one, and that should help remedy that problem as well. Okay, so I'd play around with those things, and I think that will help your image look a little bit more contemporary. I also try to increase the amount of space. See how your words are overlapping with this cool little white stroke on your box you have in here. You always want to make sure things don't overlap if they're different elements in an unintentional way. So see how there's so much space over here and there's a sufficient amount of space down here, but at the top it's overlapping. So it looks a little bit unbalanced. So try to interject some space along this edge and along this edge between the words and where you have this nice white stroke within the box. And that will help it feel a little bit more balanced as well. Overall, you're off to a great start. Your columns are looking really good. You may make them a tiny bit more narrow to help add a little bit more white space in the middle, but you have all the elements you need to have, which is one of the most important aspects of this assignment is just getting everything on the page. So great job there, and keep at it. Finalizing phase, which is a really good place to be. Okay, thanks, Penny. All right, let's see who's next. I'm going to check. I don't believe Carol opted in. Nope, doesn't look like she did. Caitlin, you're just asking a question here. Carly, you up great. I'm just looking at a list. I promise I don't have yours all memorized. Okay, Carly, yours looks pretty impressive from afar. I'm really liking how you have this image pulled across the page, full bleed on the 2 pages, and with this image that's really powerful. I'm assuming this image and this image are the 2 that you've taken yourself, so that's good. I think it looks like you're ending like on a word mid-sentence. So if this down here says continued on page, I would pull that up here and right align it with the edge of this column instead of having it down here. And maybe you make it a light gray or something. And then I don't think this shape has a stroke, but it almost looks like it does because of how this white paper is up against the orange stroke right here. So if your shape does have a stroke, I think it does because this has a stroke. Generally, I recommend you take all strokes off any shapes because it will instantly date your design. Okay, so I would recommend removing the stroke and especially sure to remove it. That will help this be more legible. You may consider making this shape a full bleed. I think that would look really nice. It looks good with the white along here, but it may look even better to also make this a full bleed as well. Just kind of a classicary way of having your images or your shapes on the page. You did a good job with your pull quote here. Let's see. Down hard to read. Trying to think how you could fix that. You could perhaps put this white font, this white type here, right aligned for a kind of narrow column underneath this and have it right aligned with your edge here. That way you would have less white on white because right here it is a little bit problematic. And if this image was larger, if it was a full bleed, you'd have a little bit more of this kind of orangey area that you could put your type, which might be helpful. And then it looks like you have your hyphens, so make sure you deselect hyphens. You always want to eliminate them. Your columns are looking super awesome. They look really nice. They look very crisp. I love how you justified them. That's great. Let me see if I have any other potential suggestions. It maybe looks, I think it looks a little bit weird here how many lines you have, um, and how many shapes in the background. It almost detracts from being able to read. And so I think it works down here mostly. But having this line, there's a lot to look at. And instead of your eye having kind of a visually restful area and being able to read the article, it get it gets a bit caught up on all the shapes. Making it a full bleed, I think, would help that because you'd eliminate some of these lines. But you may consider making this image smaller, so you eliminate some of this white space, making it bigger so it would come up and kind of cut this column more in half or in third, as opposed to only a word or two width. So play around with this area a little bit. I think it could benefit from a little bit more restraint when it comes to the amount of shapes and lines that are going on in the background. Besides that, things are looking really good. You have your subtitles, you have your nice contrasting fonts. Actually, they look like they're similar fonts. They look like they're both sans serifs, but I do think they're contrasting because you have such a nice bold. Um, this one is so nicely bolded and so much thicker that I think it still works in terms of being considered contrasting. Okay, so just play around a little bit more with your images. Make sure this is legible, and you're definitely on the right track. Okay, thanks, Carly.